How does the room look like that you are in?
Yeah, I'm going to turn it around for you to take a look in a minute. Okay, we are now live, and I'm going to just shift the computer a bit for you to see. But I'm going to also,
So will people be in the same room or are they in a different room?
they're in the same room, and I'm going to have it also live so that they can join online. People can join online as well. That's what I'm trying to figure out how to do that. Mate, can you help me to get a link, the live stream, to put it on the?
Where? Facebook?
No, this is not on Facebook because I can't get a Facebook
Okay,
connection.
to that connection.
Yeah, so I need to put it on YouTube. I mean, I'm going live on YouTube now.
He's going live on YouTube.
I'm going
Okay,
live, but I want to get a link.
the link.
I'm trying to figure out.
Let's just go to YouTube Live. YouTube Live, then you create a link, then you share with her. Then you type YouTube Live. Okay.
This is my account. I'm just going to turn the thing around a bit for you to see, and then when we get questions, we'll move them up. So this is what the room looks like.
Okay, now I can see there are some people, right? Hello, everybody. Good. Hello.
Okay. Thank you. Well, I will start. You know how to. Marty, figure out how to do it. How to share the YouTube link. There.
This link?
No, it's already there.
Do you want me to show?
Okay, let me see. All right, let me just get started. It's time. We'll do that later. All right, good morning. My name is Reverend Tolly Kura from the Free Liberia Movement. I want to welcome you today to this workshop we're about to have. And we will start by briefly introducing what the movement is all about. And then we have a special guest speaker who's going to be discussing a book that he has written. That is, he's joining us from Copenhagen. Dr. News. Let's see. All right. So the Free Liberia movement aims to have sustainable development in Liberia led by the people themselves. And across the continent of Africa and specifically in Liberia, we are under colonialism. We've been under colonialism of the American colonization for 200 years. And American colonization is different from all colonizations because when the British colonized India, you could kick them out and they go back to Britain. But when America colonized the United States of America, it's Americans colonizing Americans. And when America colonized Liberia, it created a jurisdiction that they brought Americans here to rule over the place. And for a very long time, that has been the situation where we have people like me with United States passport and Liberian passport coming to exert control, political and economic, over the people who live here. And we have an electoral system that has a channel through which people can get into power that is tied with education in the West, like in Boston where I live, and resources in the West, and they're coming here to rule over people almost indefinitely. So what we are aiming for with the Free Liberia movement is to have a different situation. Instead of having, as you can see here, the president dressed up in Western attire, being someone just like me, educated in the West, coming to rule over the people, primarily to extend the influence and interest of Western nations over the people. And the people, as you can see, have no way moving forward. What we envision is a different system whereby the people are in charge of the country. We have Article 1 of the Liberian Constitution says all power is inherent in the people, and all governments are instituted for their benefit. Okay. Oh, okay. We actually have our thing here. Monty. Monty.
We need to connect to the speaker.
Yeah. I'm sorry. We're trying to do the sound. We're trying to connect the sound. Hello? 1, 2, 3. Okay. Yeah, so I just connected the sound. So as I said, the situation we have in Liberia and most certainly in nearly all African nations is one where the official colonization has ended, but colonization continues. In the interest of Western nations or the colonizing powers are able to bring people who are educated in Western nations like me, and in some instances, especially here in Liberia, have 2 passports, just like me. I have my American passport and my Liberian passport. I'm going to show you. So that's my American passport. That's my Liberian passport. And it gives me privileges in the United States, and it also gives me privileges in Liberia. And more often with my Western education, my access to financial resources and credit in the United States, I'm able to come here and participate in an election where there's registration fee of $500 for members of the legislature. For senators, it's $750 United States dollars, and for the presidency is $2,500 plus each candidate has to have 40, no, it has to have $10,000 in their bank account. This is all according to the election laws of Liberia. You must have $10,000 in your bank account, and you must also have 100,000 insurance bond. So the financial requirement is burdensome, and for typical Liberians, they cannot really afford those things. But that's the system we have in place. It's been certified and embraced by the government of the United States as free and fair. And everybody comes out and say, you got the right to vote. So people come and vote, and nothing changes because the system is designed to enrich and empower the politician. That's the way it was designed. That's the way it has been working. And now what we want to do is to provide equal opportunities for all Liberians to be able to attain their God-given potential. So if God gives you the gifts and talent to become a scientist or an inventor or an engineer or whatever, you don't have to live and die in poverty and not realizing your dreams. And the people obviously also need to be in a position where their aspirations for nationhood can be accomplished and they can see sustainable development led by the people, democracy, a government of the people, by the people, and for the people. And one of the things that we have been talking about is also the question of visa waiver for Liberians. On Thursday, 2 days ago, about 300 migrants, how many people went?
336.
336 persons went to the United States Embassy on Benson Street to get visa to go to the United States for various reasons, scholarships, medical, different things. And how many people were granted visa?
Less than 30 people were granted.
Okay, so almost 300 people were denied visa, earning the embassy a lot of money. But those people, they kept their money and there's nothing they can do about it. So a lot of injustice has gone on. Like I just came from the United States where people who've been there since Obama, Liberian refugees of the war since Obama, are in dire straits without access to employment, business opportunity, or even humanitarian assistance. This needs to change, and it can only be changed by the people. Today, we have our guest, Dr. Niels Hahn, who is going to be speaking about neocolonialism and also about a book that he has written, which is 2 centuries of American military operations in Liberia, which most Liberians are clueless about and don't know. I myself didn't know until I started to read his book. And we'll make copies of that book, PDF, available for all participants today. So I want to thank all of you for coming. We'll briefly have each one of you to please introduce yourself, and then we'll introduce our guests, and then we'll get started. So I'm going to start from right here.
My name is Sarah Suka.
When did you hear about the Free Liberia movement?
Last year.
Oh, okay. Okay, come on, let's go. Follow me. And when did you hear about Free Liberia movement?
Couples of hours ago,
Okay, thank you for coming. Your name is?
The following that we just here yesterday.
Yesterday.
Yeah.
Oh, wow. Okay, thank you for coming. Where do you live? Which community?
One time around here in the
Sir?
Good morning. I'm Ernest Waiver from located at Busher Island.
When did you hear about it?
Actually, I've been following you on the radio, OKFN, and it was Saturday on the radio. I'm calling you.
Okay, thank you When did you first hear Thank you very much. Sir.
Yeah, wisdom power of the world. I heard about it. The field of problem through my good friend and brother, Sekou Masale, or not coming. I'm happy to be here today.
My name is Masale. I've been here for the past years.
Thank you. Which community you live in?
I live in the community.
Yeah, my name is Didi Rosario. I heard about the Liberia movement. Around January when I was in Mozambique.
Mozambique. All right. Cool. Yeah.
That's good.
There was one more lady.
Yes.
Good morning.
Davis, which community do you live in? Carver. And when did you hear about the Free Liberia movement? Well, I want to welcome everyone. I'm going to get the guests to come to just briefly tell us its meaning Okay, let me.
You can also turn the camera a bit for him to see the long view moving.
Yeah.
You can tell him.
Okay, he dropped.
The drop?
Yeah.
Okay.
So let me see. Stop sharing.
How long is the link for? Does the link expire? Okay, please like this here.
Okay.
Choose this one.
All right, there we are.
Hear me?
So, sir, we can hear you, and just kindly introduce yourself and tell us where you are right now, and then we can get started.
Yes. I lost the connection for a moment.
Okay, so we're turning over to you now to start the presentation.
Great. Thank you very much. I think the connection is a little bit unstable, so please give me a sign as soon as the sound drops or if the picture drops. Can you all hear me now?
Yes, sir, we can hear you loud and clear.
Excellent, great. Thank you very much. And thank you very much for arranging this. I'm very delighted to talk with all of you. I have been researching the topic of neocolonialism for nearly 20 years. And in general, I would say it's not a topic that's very popular in the Western part of the world. It comes with some challenges, which I will also talk about later. It's not something that many people talk about in general. I would say it's not just related to Liberia, but it's related to a number of countries. You could say most of the African continent, where the notion of neocolonialism is quite strong, especially among most politicians and academics. But in the Western part of the world, it's something that's highly marginalized or ignored, something we don't really like to talk about. My research ended up in the book that you mentioned before, this one here, called 2 Centuries of US Military Operations in Liberia. It ended up being published by the US military, and that's a strange story in itself, an interesting story, because there was a lot of resistance and challenges for making this book and doing the research and collecting the data. So I didn't expect that to be published by such a publisher. But I'm glad it did, because it also gives a lot of legitimacy to the book, that it has been thoroughly reviewed by the US Air Force Intellectual Center, Air University Press. Now I will talk a little. The book is available online for free, and also a lot of my research articles are available online. So I will refer to the details to this material, and instead today I will talk a little about how I got into this research and some of the questions it raises and challenges I have encountered. Myself, I started in 1995 to 1997 as a technical advisor in Tanzania. I was working with the Danish government programs. I was in my mid-20s and knew very, very little about Africa. And I was having that idea and impression that development aid was something we would give to support the country's development. And I would say part of it was, but part of it was also about business and interest of private businesses and Western states. I found it difficult to really understand what was going on in East Africa and Tanzania. I tried to study the history. I learned the language, Swahili. I learned a lot about culture and so on. I got to talk to a lot of people. I learned a lot from them. I couldn't give much back, unfortunately, at that time. But when I left Tanzania in 97, I knew at least that there was a lot of things that I did not know. And there was something I really had to go deeper in and try to understand. And that was issues such as what is the UN system? How does it work? What is the role of the World Bank? What is the IMF? What is capitalism? What is socialism really? What is neocolonialism? It was a word I've heard a few times, but not really understood what it was. It sounds just to have a negative connotation, but I didn't really understand the political and economic system of neocolonialism. Anyway, it was clear to me there was something wrong, that so many people in the world can live in very wealthy countries, and so many more people live in very poor countries. So you just live with this impression, why poverty? Why are the resources distributed the way they are? So I then decided to leave the area of development, and then we joined the Doctors Without Borders, Médecins Sans Frontières, MSF, as I think most of you would know in Liberia. So from 2002 to 2004, I was in Liberia myself as a technical expert. The Claretown Health Center, Claretown Clinic, New Crew Town Clinic, and Redemption Hospital, and and so on. Now this was during the war, and it was when Charles Taylor was in power. It was also with the transition where he was forced out of office, and when the UN military operation intervention took place. Now, what was really interesting to me when I arrived in Liberia was that I have read whatever I could about the country, whatever I had time to read, the reports, the most known books. But I couldn't find much about the role of the US in Liberia, and in particularly not the role of the US in the war. But when I arrived in Liberia in August 2002, I was briefed and found out very quickly that the US government was the main actor in the war. And that was not surprising as such, because US wars, thinking of Vietnam, Cambodia, Laos, Korean wars, and so on, the list is very long. But what I found puzzling was I couldn't find any literature on it. There was very, very little. It was mentioned here and there, but very marginalized, if not completely ignored. I also realized that in general, most people in Liberia knew about this, but outside Liberia, it was very different view. And I also knew that it was not possible to come to Liberia as a researcher or journalist without knowing the role of the US in the war. But still, nothing was really written about it. Nothing was published about it. So this silence surprised me a lot, in particular when Monrovia was attacked in 2003 in July, with the three major attacks on Monrovia. At one point, I was in Freetown, and I could not understand why the media was not covering what was going on more balanced. And I started writing an article on it. And after a few days, I gave up because I could see this would not really lead to anything. But I also had talked with so many Liberians. I came back to Liberia in Monrovia. People talked about what was going on and that the world outside should know. And I decided that, well, I will do whatever I can to make this more publicly available. I just didn't know how to do it. But I mean, you know how the suffering has been in Liberia, how millions of people have been displaced, and how poverty has deepened because of these wars. And I think it's very important that people speak out about it if they have the knowledge about it. I mean, keeping silence is kind of taking a consenting part of what has been going on. I left Liberia in 2004, and then I continued working for Doctors Without Borders as a coordinator. I went to Afghanistan, and after that Somalia. I was in Sudan, a number of other countries. And what I saw was the same picture. We have a major power as the US as the prime actor in these conflicts. But not everywhere it gets the coverage as it should. In Liberia, it was quite obvious. It was a major US military operation. Sorry, did I say Afghanistan? In Afghanistan, it was very obvious. But a lot of questions were unanswered. We did not really understand why they had to go to war against the whole country based on a terror attack in New York on the 9th of September that year. The same with Iraq was also a very obvious US involvement. Again, the basis on which the war took place was based on statements of weapons of mass destruction not exist. But then the whole scenario and the premise just moved on, telling new stories. In Somalia, the intervention, the US military intervention that took place in the early 90s, Operation Restore Hope, was also very confusing. And working in these places, I try to find information, try to find literature, what was going on, because obviously what I heard from many people in Africa was very different from what I could read in the Western media and in the Western literature in general. And that happened as well in Sudan. I was a coordinator in Darfur when it was labeled as a genocide. It was highly politicized, and it was very difficult at that time, even when being there, to really find out what is happening and where do we get information about it to understand it. So I decided to go to London because I know they have good libraries on colonialism. They've been a major colonial power, so if that's a good place to try to understand more the minds of the colonialists. And I was thinking I would probably do a master's there on war and conflicts, and I would get a lot of answers to my questions. But well, that turned out to be very different. I met a lot of other quite bright students coming from different countries, having a lot of knowledge with them. But after going some of the through the courses and the readings and the literature list, it was very confusing because kind of the Western powers were, and the role of the Western powers, especially in African conflicts, they were completely extracted. It didn't hardly exist. They talked about if this is greed or grievance. They talked about barbarism, and in many ways also together with popular Hollywood films like Lords of War and Blood Diamonds and Black Hawk Down and so on, presented a very different picture of what was going on. And I think in general, presenting most African people in a very unjust way and very problematic.
Okay, so the thing has frozen. Let me see. Okay, I'm going to try to reconnect with him just in a minute. My apologies, I'm trying to reconnect. So if you can bear with me for a minute. I will reconnect. Yeah, so can you try to come back on? You just dropped off the screen. Yeah, if you can do it again, I would appreciate it.
Yes, I think it's coming back now.
Okay, yeah, I see it.
Yeah. Good.
Is everything in place?
Everything is in place. Please go ahead.
Excellent. Good. Yeah, so it was a very frustrating time for me to study at the University of London. But I learned a lot about knowledge control, and if knowledge is power, then of course it's at the academic level. There should be a certain control over knowledge. But I got in touch with a professor a Brazilian professor in economics called Alfredo Sarfilo, and he was very interested in the topic that I was interested in, which was neocolonialism.
Okay.
So I worked together with him, and then I started engaged on a PhD program. And when you do a PhD, you have to have a case study. And looking into US imperialism and neocolonialism, there are many cases to choose among. I was thinking Afghanistan and Sudan. They were very complicated because of the language, and also it was very difficult to get access to data from primary sources and reliable sources. So I kept coming back to Liberia, where I've been for 2 years already. And I had a network of people already, and also I knew that the Liberians are very outspoken. It's very good, and that's very important for the research, because if people will not talk with you or talk about sensitive issues, it's very difficult to do anything. And that was something that was very important to me. So I decided to really use Liberia as the case. And the more I looked into Liberia as an example of an early example of neocolonialism, the more things just seemed to come together. Around the same time, and I think that was perhaps the most important work I have read on this topic, that was from Ghana's first president, Kwame Nkrumah, and his book called Neocolonialism, the Last Stage of Capitalism. No, sorry, the Last Stage of Imperialism. When I read that, it kind of clicked a lot of things. It was published in 1965, but not very easy to find in general in the literature, and not very easy to actually find copies at that time. But that gave me some clues of what to look for, and then something very interesting happened, because Nkrumah was removed from power in a coup in 1966 when he was on a state visit to China. And much of what he has published was destroyed and burned, and some historians were hired to rewrite the history and portray Nkrumah in a different way. And I'm mentioning this because I think Nkrumah is a key person to think of when studying neocolonialism. It was also Nkrumah, together with Ahmed Sékou Touré, at that time president just next door in Guinea. And they drafted a resolution on neocolonialism that was adopted by the Pan-African Conference in Cairo in 1961. Now, this was a major conference, and a very important conference. And usually these conference resolutions, they will be archived and they will be available afterwards many places, shouldn't be difficult to find. But this particular resolution had kind of disappeared. I read about it in a book, and I said, oh, right, if there's a resolution on neocolonialism, I have to find it. But I couldn't find it. It was not in the Keating archives. It was not in the British Library. I couldn't find it anywhere. I spent 3 months, and I found it as a pamphlet in the basement in a library in London. Now, after that, this was important document, so we made sure it would be online, and it was published by Pampasuka, and now you can find it easily if you search for it. But what is interesting is that actually very important documents can just disappear out of the history, out of the archives. Now, I will read a little bit from that resolution that really intrigued me and that guided me also what to look for. Now, it says here specifically that neocolonialism is the survival of the colonial system in spite of formal recognition of political independence in emerging countries. If you think of Liberia as an early example of a neocolonial state, Liberia got independence in 1847, but until then it was a under direct colonial control of the American colonization society, and divided into different smaller colonies before that. Now, when the recognition of national independence becomes inevitable, they try to deprive these countries of the essence of real independence. This is done by imposing unequal economic, military, and technical conventions, or by creating puppet government following false elections. It's important to keep in mind that this resolution was adopted in 1961. The issue of puppet governments was seen in many African countries in the 1960s, how they were created. I mean, governments that was still controlled by the former colonial powers. But if you look at the history of Liberia, you'll also see that there have been a lot of challenges. Not all governments have complied and been very cooperative with the US government. There's been a lot of resistance against the US attempt to control Liberia. And that's also in my book. I had a subtitle called Challenges of Resistance and Compliance, because there has been a lot of resistance in Liberia. Now, this resolution continues and says that whenever such machinations appears insufficient to hamper the combativity and determination of popular liberation movements, dying colonialism tries under the cover of neocolonialism, or through the guided intervention of the United Nations, the balkanization of newly independent states or the systematic division of the political and syndicate vivid forces, and in desperate cases goes as far as plots, repressive measures by army and police, and murder. So this is the important part, also inspired by what happened in Congo and later Zaire, now the Democratic Republic of Congo, considering also how Patrice Lumumba was removed and how some international institutions, including many UN institutions and Western governments, were involved in what was happening, including, of course, the murder of Lumumba. So Congo is also a very interesting case for this study. But again, Liberia is the much older case and the longest case. So it goes on and says that neocolonialism manifests itself through economic and political intervention, intimidation, and blackmail in order to prevent African states from directing their political, social, economic policies towards the exploitation of their natural wealth for the benefit of their people. This part, I think, is also important because we often hear many popular movements in Africa and the justice movement targeting the governments for not really being able to implement progressive policies that benefits the majority of the people and to really address the issues of poverty. But it's also important to keep in mind that neocolonialism is built up in a system that they need to make governments to comply with a certain agenda, and to actually put governments, not just to have governments in place, but to get them to comply. What we see is that a country, superpower like the United States, can make a change of government basically anywhere, a military coup or in other different ways, and they can install a new government in most African countries. Now, one of the problems would be to actually get this new government to continue to comply with the wishes of Washington. And that, of course, relates to the access to natural resources, markets, and labor. And what we also will see in many cases now across Africa is that when a new government comes into power in a given country, many African leaders see China as a better partner in development, and they try to move closer to Beijing than to many of the Western powers in Paris, London, or Washington. And there, of course, we now see a very different form of competition. But I think also what we can see and learn from Liberia, especially from the 1970s, was that when President Talbot came into power, he tried to change the system. He tried to make changes from what Tubman had implemented. Tubman was probably one of the most compliant presidents in Liberia's history. He was following Washington as they would prefer it. Talbot made a huge shift from that. But it was there was a lot of misunderstandings, and basically so my research shows is that most of the problems that happened in the 80s, the 90s, and up to in the zeros started in the 1970s when Talbot tried to change that neo-colonial system of Liberia. I could talk much about the details, but again, as I mentioned, the book is there, and I'll be happy also to find ways to ship some hard copies to Liberia if they're not available. It's available online. There are also shorter article extracts that's more focused on the period from the 1970s to 2003. So I refer to that, and then instead suggest that we do some questions and comments and answers from here. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. Thank you very much. So we're going to take some questions, and I just want to say that we're going to run until a little after 11, maybe about 11:15 or so. We're going to turn it down, and then we'll move upstairs to continue. So right now the time is 10:36, and so we'll start with some questions. This discussion is about neocolonialism. So could you just tell us briefly what is neocolonialism, and then I'll take questions from people in the audience. Yeah?
I don't think you hear it.
Did you hear me?
I can hear, yes.
Yes, so I said just give us a short definition of neocolonialism.
Great. Okay, but then let me ask you, how do you see the functioning of the neocolonial system in Liberia from your perspective?
From my perspective, Liberia was established as a colony of the United States, but the United States wanted the people to be in the dark and not know that they were colonizing Liberia. And so a lot of people in Liberia would say, our country has never been under colonial rule, under any country. Most Liberians would say that. And so it's like, I see it as a trap, where it's deception of the fisherman wanting to eat the fish for dinner, but he says the trap and puts some food in there to attract the fish, indirectly telling the fish, I want to feed you. But when you eat that fish, the fish becomes the dinner. So I think in the context of Liberia, it's been controlled by the United States government, but the United States government tells people that Liberia is independent. So that's how I look at it myself. So if because of time, maybe I can take people from the audience. Anyone has a question relative to what we just discussed about how America established Liberia and has controlled it for 200 years up until now? Yes.
Yeah, good morning. Francis Layo, Liberia. We really want to understand, was Liberia colonized by the American government, or it was just colonized by the ACS? Then there's something we need to understand. Was Liberia colonized in 1847 or 1827? Which one is the right one?
I heard the first part. If Liberia was funded, was colonized by America, by the American government, but I didn't hear the last part.
The last part was Liberia colonized by the American Colonization Society or by the United States government? That's his question.
Well, great. that is a good question. Because I actually start the book looking at these issues. It's difficult to give a clear answer to this, because what was the government and what was a private organization encouraged by the government to set it up in a private system. Now, one of the biggest problems with the early history of Liberia, if you read most of the books on Liberia, is that it's generally presented as was founded by the American Colonization Society, and that colonization society was made up by philanthropists who wanted to help the freed slave-made people in Liberia, in the US, to go back to Africa. Now, so this colonization society is presented as philanthropic and made up by philanthropists, but the leaders of that society, they were all slaveholders, white slaveholders. And that's one of the first questions it raises. So how can they portray white slave owners as philanthropists that certainly wants to help some of the freed slave-made people in America? Well, of course, if they are the ones who write the history, or they fund those who write the history, then of course they can write what they want. But the fact is very different. These slave owners, they were afraid of the slave rebellions in the United States. And that started particularly with the Haitian Revolution, end of 1700. And that made a fear throughout the Americas, both in Central America, Southern American countries, and especially in the United States. There were also a very significant point in 1800, a slave rebellion called the Gabriel Conspiracy, which was an enslaved man called Gabriel, who mobilized more than 100 people, both black and working class white people. They were not that many, but they were in solidarity with those who were enslaved, to make an uprising and then take James Monroe as hostage. He was the governor of in Richmond, sitting in Richmond. And interesting enough, you know that Monrovia is named after him. So they wanted to take him as a hostage to put pressure on putting an end to slavery in the United States. Now, after that, Monroe and Jefferson, they write a lot of letters to each other where they're very concerned about this slave rebellions. It was infiltrated at a very early stage, so it didn't materialize, but that it was close to happen made them very fearful. And they start to look for, and you can read the letters, you can find them online, about how they must find a place to send away these people far away from America, because they pose as a threat, and then they instigate more slave rebellions and they encourage people to rebel. So this became a huge national security problem in the United States, and they had to start looking for a different economic system. Now, again, much of this can be documented if you search for it, but I think it's a false statement to say that Liberia was founded by the American Colonization Society as a philanthropic project, because it wasn't. It was because of the resistance from the slave-made people in the United States, and it was made as a possible solution to U.S. national security. Now, the American Colonization Society, many of the people there, they were also government officials. So it's hard to distinguish between what was actually U.S. government and what was private. Also, when the first delegation came to West Africa, it was backed up by the U.S. military and the U.S. Navy. So the question is very good. I would say it's very hard to distinguish, and I'm not sure that it's so important to distinguish whether if it was the United States government or if it was a private colonization society. It doesn't really change.
Thank you very much. I just want to add from the book, Legislative and Political History of Liberia by Goodrich, and it has a lot of the information outlined in there. And there are, for me personally, there are two things I look at to answer that question. Number one, actually three things I look at to answer that question. Number one is the American Declaration of Independence. We hold these truths to be self-evident. All men are created equal. And based on that, the Massachusetts Constitution came into force, and a landmark case called Braun and Best versus Ashley, where an enslaved woman went to court to challenge her enslavement, and she won. Landmark case, she became the first person in the United States to win a case of freedom, and she got paid for her services. So I look at the American Declaration of Independence. I also look at the Massachusetts Constitution. All men are created free and equal. In this landmark case, Braun and Best versus Ashley, those established the fact that American blueprint originally was all men are created equal and are endowed by their creator with certain inalienable rights, God-given rights. But then on March 26, 1790, James Monroe was in Congress, and George Washington was a slave master, was president. So they passed a new law called the First Nationality Act. The First Nationality Act said only white persons will be citizens of the United States. That was a departure from the blueprint that all men are created equal in the Massachusetts Constitution, that all persons are born free and equal. So America became the first apartheid nation in the world. And America was one of the strongest supporters of apartheid in South Africa, even to the point where after Nelson Mandela was released from prison, they kept him on their terrorist watch list for 18 years. United States of America. Also, there is no country that you can show in the world that this country was under colonialism or imperialism and America came to fight for them to be independent. Rather, what we see is the case of Patrice Lumumba in Congo. We see the case of the Kenyan Burma movement. We see, so many different cases. But the law, the First Nationality Act, gave them the reason to find a way to remove these troublemakers who were actually citizens of the United States based on the American Declaration of Independence. And then on March 3, 1819, the law that was passed, signed by President Monroe, actually authorized the United States Navy to create the colony. It provided the money. So the money was provided by the United States government, American taxes, the force of the United States Navy, and a law passed by Congress, signed by the president. Two laws. The first law that said only white people will be citizens, and the second law that said we're going to create this colony overseas. And the most important part of that law was the Attorney General's interpretation. Number 229 said that you cannot use the money to transport people from the United States to Africa. 229, you can't use the money to transport people to Africa. You cannot use the money to hire people to go and work in the barracks, to build barracks, etc. And so if you read 229 and you read the laws and the Treaty of 1821, it was the United States government, because the Treaty of 1821, December 15, does not have signature of or reference to the American Colonization Society when they purchased the land by hook and crook with the pistol on the guy's head. It was a Navy officer under the command of the Secretary of the Navy and the President of the United States, James Monroe, that they actually purchased a piece of land here. And on that paper, it said for settlement of citizens of the United States. It didn't say for free slaves. So it's a complete conspiracy of the United States government in creating Liberia as a colony, as you said earlier,
to address a national security problem, which is the free blacks are going to incite the slaves to revolt like Haiti and kill or capture people like James Monroe, who owned slaves, who never freed any slave in his whole life, as well as George Washington, president. They owned slaves and never freed any slaves in their whole life. So the idea that it was a non-profit organization that created Liberia can barely hold water. Any other question?
All right, thank you very much, Dr. Lewis. I want to ask a very simple question, and that has to do with African countries' relationship to the United States. Don't you think that African countries are constrained to subject themselves or submit themselves to neo-colonialism because most African countries.
Oops. I don't know if you can hear me, but I lost the sound and the picture froze like 30 seconds ago. Hello? Yes, hello, Tolly. We lost the connection. I don't know if you can see me online, but I can't see or hear anything.
Okay, so we are trying to reconnect the connection, but there's a question about whether or not, because African nations have economic problems and rely on the colonial powers for subsistence, is it not okay for them to that neocolonialism is necessary because of the economic situation in African nations? Basically.
crown to have and run Sierra Leone and Freetown. So they were looking for a cheap place, and that is also one of the arguments in neo-colonialism, is that it's a cheaper system to run. It's also a safer system because it's much harder for those who live in the neo-colony to actually understand how does it function. Now, to your question, which is very interesting, I think the sound went off now, so I better call back. Hello? Hello? I think the WhatsApp connection went off as well. I can see myself here on the screen, but I'm not sure if it goes through. So I'm calling. I think we are disconnected.
You are not disconnected, you are on. Just keep talking.
I'm on. Sorry. Good. I now I can see and hear you too. To the question, it's a really interesting question. I haven't heard that before. I think perhaps you could ask the same, that if you are an enslaved people in the 1800s, what was the alternative to the slave system? You could ask the same question during the direct formal colonial systems. Were there any alternative to those systems? And so again, you can ask, well, what's the alternative to the neo-colonial system? I guess, and what I hear around is that the alternative is to be a free, independent state where the state can pursue the policies that are in the interest of the people living in that state, and that would be for most of the African continent, for most of the people living in Africa. I think one of the key issues here is, first of all, eradication of poverty. To achieve that, it's necessary to have a form of industrialization, and industrialization seems to be a key issue. What we see in many places is that when African states have implemented industrialization policies like Pol Pot did in the 1970s, then things starts to happen. That seems to be a crucial, a central issue, because when a country industrializes, it increases its national power. And when it increases its national power by being able to be self-sufficient in food and also in a variety of different goods, it becomes much more difficult to control by external powers. So that is something that's very fundamental. And I think what is very important now, and what we see across Africa, is that we see an engagement from China that supports industrialization policies. And this is a game changer. It's something that changes across the continent. New governments can come in place in most African countries, and most of them would consider China as a better partner in development. Where it goes in the future, it's hard to say, but that is definitely the key issue of the 20th century to the 21st century. That's I think is this development across the African continent. So this I would also like to say and talk much more about, but I can see we're running out of time. So maybe there can be another time where we can discuss more specific issues. So for now, I would say thank you to all of you, and I hope we can follow up, and I'll be happy to participate in any meetings possible, and also I'd be happy to share my research and my books with you. So thank you very much, and thank you very much Trolley for arranging this meeting.
All right, thank you very much. My regards to your daughter and your family, and we will definitely be in touch.
Thank you very much. And I will send you my greetings from my daughter. She's 5 years old, and she's also very interested in colonialism. She's very worried about colonialists. So even a 5-year-old daughter girl are concerned about these issues. So all the best, and I hope to see you again. Thank you.
Thank you very much. All right, so we'll continue our discussion. If there's any other person that has another question, you can just speak. I guess he has to leave now, but we can continue the discussion. Oh, okay. All right. Any other questions? So I actually heard for the first time from a guy here who is I think he said he's a college graduate, but he currently lives in Fallon, Liberia. And he told me that, colonization is actually good because the white people can do a better job. They will be able to get rid of corruption, blah, blah, blah. What he was telling me, I had a young woman who's also a PhD student at Northeastern. We were in a car together. And she said, who is that? Who is that person? I said, that's a Liberian. And then she said, oh my God, how can a person say colonization is okay because we're going to be able to have a better control from corruption, etc., as if the white people or the colonial powers are not corrupt. We just heard that on Thursday, there were over 300 people that showed up at the U.S. Embassy in Monrovia for visa, and they denied almost 300 of them. And they earned, we calculated how much was the money?
$62,000.
They earned $62,000 in one day from visa refusal. Now, all of you here today heard about this workshop that we're having about going to America without visa. And you look around and see how many people, it's not even 100. We have a serious problem. The problem we have is that, again, for me, it's the trap. People believe that we cannot solve our own problem. Somebody far away that we don't know is probably sitting in America is going to solve our problem. On this particular issue, we have said there are 41 countries in the world today that have free visa to the United States, including enemies of the United States. How did they get it? They ask. They don't have anything written in their law, they don't have any treaty or anything, but they just keep asking until they get it. Then the question I ask is, how many times have you seen African countries and African citizens going to ask these people who have stolen from us for centuries, who have taken everything out of here and take it to their place? How many times have you seen people go to ask them for equal opportunities or even to make a demand for what they're giving to other people? It has never happened at all. And here in Liberia, this is the first time we're starting this movement to demand equal opportunities for people to be able to retain their God-given potential. And look around and see how many people we have in here. And I'm not even sure if everybody in here even believes that it is possible. But that's where the problem is. I go back to the American Declaration of Independence, and he just said, when the American Declaration of Independence was written, when they said, we the people, or all men are created equal, they were not referring to all the people, because Native Americans have been living in this place for thousands of years, and they were killing them to take over their country. Right now, you go to America, you'll be hard-pressed to see any Native American. And when you see them, they're in reservation in the United States. So America is colonizing Americans in a way that you can't get rid of that colonization because it's inherent in a place. So one of the things I want to do as we concluded this, if anybody has a question we can ask, but I want to talk a little bit about myself, my life, where I am and how I got to this place, and the work that I've done without any help from any government, any church, or anyone else established, or any grant in the past 34 years. And we'll listen to some of the people who have benefited from that work that I've done. Because the message I want you to take home today is, with God above, all things are possible. And you don't need to have grant from, I mean, when I'm coming from America here, I show my American passport. When I'm going back, I show my American passport. When I'm coming here, I show my Liberian passport. And everyone in Liberia that see